marriage, and today I'm going to round that out. But the first thing I want to do is look at Colossians 3, verses 18 and 19. Verse 18, now you've got some bullets to go in your gun. We've been studying this right here for the past 2 or 3 weeks, and now I want you to see how the Scripture will pop for you when you go to it. Colossians 3:18, wives, that's female, married. This is believing wives. Wives, submit. We know this word, actually submit, is not that great of a term. It is respond. Be responding to your husbands. And what do you respond to? It says, wives, be responding to your husband's aggressive love. Remember that? The wife is the responder. The husband is the aggressor. Be responding to your husband's aggressive love, as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, aggressively love your wives, and do not be bitter towards them. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read verse 20 and 21 we'll be leading into today. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Now, what I've got for you this morning, we're going to look at 12 points of review, and I'm going to round out our marriage points, and these are going to be a review, and some of these things I'm going to go through pretty fast. You'll have to do shorthand if you want to make notes. And I'm going to tell you, the reason I've done this is because there's a lot of things that need to be said that I haven't said, and there's some things that I have said that need to be reviewed, and so we'll go on. Point number 1, God planned your counterpart in eternity past, so don't sweat it. When I do a wedding, this is my point. God placed these two people on the planet in the same country, in the same dispensation, in the same generation, and He made sure their paths would meet. And they stand before you today as a product of God's plan. You ever thought about that? If you were a year or two born earlier or later, probably you wouldn't have met your spouse. But God made sure that He put you right there in the same period of human history. There's also an application to the ones who are not married. Look, you don't have to go on the big search. You don't have to take out an advertisement. You don't have to beat the bushes looking for your right man or right woman. Just live your life. Live your life. And the main issue in living your life is make it to spiritual maturity. That's the goal. Here's the problem you'll face as a young person who's looking to get married. God can't bless you with something you can't handle. You got that? And one of the greatest blessings you'll ever have is the right opposite number in your life. So that right here, God is playing for you the perfect woman. You got that, guys? Girls, right here, God is playing for you the perfect man. But if He sees that you will destroy the gift, He will not give it. So our job is to keep on taking in Bible doctrine, keep on advancing spiritually, so that we build integrity. We build integrity so that when we do meet the right person, we don't destroy the gift. And so we see there's an application in point number 1 to the single person. Point 2, dating is for learning how to deal with the opposite sex. And so I should just put dating here. You could use courtship, whatever you think your right method is, parents. But obviously, we want our young people to learn how to work with the opposite sex. And it's imperative that they learn how to make some mistakes before they get married. And they say, well, I'm not going to do that again. Or here's another issue. Yeah, we dated for a while, but then I figured out he did this, and I can't stand that. So you make a list, ladies. This is a checkpoint that I can never deal with. This guy doesn't deer hunt, and hey, I got to have pride backstrap in the fall. You got that? And then other ladies may say, this guy deer hunting and he's killing Bambi out here. I can't live with him. So dating is for learning. It's for making a checklist. And obviously this is not a diatribe on dating, and I've done that before, but we'll go on. Point number 3, a man who claims he is eligible should be independent. We see in Genesis the order of marriage is for a man to leave his family, his home, and go out and be joined to his wife. That's a separate location. And so when a man goes out and he says, I'm on the market, I'm looking for the right woman, we can look at his life and say, well, are you an independent operator? Are you an independent operator? Because we see here that if the man is still thriving from his mother, in other words, he's not detached from the breast yet, and he's not independent yet, and he still relies on dear old mom, he's not ready for his right woman. If he can't make it in life, in other words, he doesn't have his life organized enough to be able to get up and go to work, be able to hold a job, be able to pay the bills, be able to keep things in line, he's not ready to be married. We're talking about adding another person to that. If he's not ready to take care of his own welfare, in other words, he can't stay clothed. He can't take care of his teeth, whatever it is. How's he going to help take care of another person? And then the last thing I would say is the last thing a new wife would want to do is have to compete with the mother-in-law. And so a man has to be an independent operator if he wants to be able to go into marriage and have it succeed. A marriage should mature in stages. You say, well, once you're married, man, it's just boom, you're done. Well, that's really not the way it really should happen. If you want to have a great marriage, it actually should start out with dating. A great way to learn who somebody is go out on dates with them and do it for a while. And somebody can fool you for a while, but after you date them, then you can find out who they really are. Sometimes that changes when you get married, but so we go out on dates. This is a dating relationship, or however that works out for you, courtship, things like that. Then a couple can be engaged, and a lot of guys I know that they can date fine, but then when they're engaged, they just start sweating bullets and they start feeling like they may be fixing to get tied down, and that's when they break. And so even in the period of time when they're engaged, this is a good time to find out who the person really is, and if they're willing to wait on you. The third, after the marriage, should be the honeymoon. Did you know the Bible in the Old Testament, if you were a newlywed, you couldn't go to war for a year? Did you know that? The Bible says if a young man gets married, just forget his military life. Every man in Israel was in the military. I don't know if you knew that or not. If he could walk on his feet, he was in the military. But the Bible said if he's newly married, let him take off for a year and make his wife happy. In other words, he was to be obsessed with making her happy. And so we see that the man was to take a full year and to concentrate on his marriage and to concentrate on making his wife happy. And I think that's a great thing. And you say, well, we're going to take a honeymoon for 3 days to wherever. Heck, it should last for a year. Now, I know you have to make money, but this should be a period of time where you're not having to I think in the greatest situation that children should come later, and that's coming up. After the honeymoon is over, a man should concentrate on his career. You say, why career and then children? You got to have money to have children. It takes money to raise a child. A while back, I saw where it took $1 million to raise a child and to send them through college. Yeah, that's a lot of money. And so a man has to concentrate on a career. And many times you can get behind, and it's impossible to get caught up because you have to concentrate on how to make enough money to support a family. And then we have children. That comes next in a perfect world, okay? God can work it out if it's not perfect. And then after you've raised your children, you ought to be able to grow old together and enjoy your life. Intentionally, after I examined many marriages in life, you see the happiest people are the ones that are having the grandchildren, and they're able to play, and then they're able to send them home. And they're going to show you their picture of their babies, or they want to tell about their lives of their children and how they're doing well. And so sometimes you see the greatest part of marriage is actually after you've been married for a while, it grows. And so we see the stages of marriage. I talked about point number 5, the money situation needs to be planned out. There's a certain amount of money that you have to be alive, okay? In America, it's illegal not to have money, I should say that. It's not actually illegal now because of the situation of socialism. But in America, it should be illegal for you not to have money. You know why? You got to pay taxes. If you're a member of society and you're functioning in society, you should be paying taxes. You should be a member of society who is working and adding to the country. And the way you do that is you make money and you pay your taxes. And the money situation is a big problem in most marriages. And I'm not here today to try to tackle the whole problem, but I'm going to tell you, you should know how much money it takes you to make it in a month. And you should be able to say, we're going to put this much in savings. We're going to spend this much on food, on electricity, on housing. We're going to spend this much on our cars and on fuel and on insurance. We're going to spend this much on clothing. We're going to spend this much on going out, set amount of money that you have to spend on entertainment and things like that. And so the money situation is a problem in marriage, and having a set amount, a budget, is a big advantage when you go into dealing with money. And of course, two people together have to agree on how they're going to spend their money. And so money will always be an issue in marriage, and you've got to figure out what works for you. This is a point that you haven't heard yet. You need to learn the love language of your spouse. Learn the love language. There's 5 different love languages. I'm going to give them to you. The first one is words of affirmation. Words of affirmation. That simply means that you say, honey, thank you for going to work today and busting your tail so that we can have a house to live in. And you know your husband wants to hear that from you. That's his love language. And so you find out how that you can use words of affirmation. You can say, honey, thank you for digging out the sewer line. And I know that wasn't pleasant, but I appreciate you being able to do that. And so words of affirmation in the same way with the wife. Thank you, darling, for this great meal that you prepared. I know you worked hard on it, and it was great. And so we use words as a love language. The second love language is acts of service. Acts of service. I know you've been out working hard. Listen to this. An old farmer that plowed with a team of mules, at the end of the day, do you know what he did with his mules? He'd take his mules and he'd put them in the barn and he'd brush them down. He'd clean them up. He'd corn them. In the old days, they fed more corn than they did hay. He'd corn them. And he'd feed them good and he'd put them in their stall and they'd lay down and he'd rub them. He'd rub their muscles because their muscles would get tight and they'd get hard. And he knew they'd worked hard all day and he'd rub them down and he'd give them mules a massage. Well, I'm going to tell you what, if you got a working man, there's some things you're going to have to do for him to keep him maintained, like an old mule. You're going to have to keep him fed. You're going to have to show him a little love. You're going to have to rub him down every once in a while. You're going to have to walk on his back, whatever it is you do. Get all the kinks out of him. And acts of service. And so we see that some people, they just want, if you just took and just made your husband a sandwich to go in his lunchbox, sometimes he would just have a smile on his face all day long. And so the same thing, males with the ladies. They want to see the yard mowed, or they want to see their car washed, or they want to see that you fix something around the place there. So acts of service is a love language. The third love language is receiving gifts. So we see that some people, that speaks to them, that is their love language, and they want to have a note or a flower or a gift, whatever it is, and they want to be surprised with it. And this is how some people, this is how they respond. If it's a lady, if it's a man, and it's different. And so receiving gifts is the third. Fourth is quality time. Some people need time, and quality time is their main component in the factor of love. And so quality time is a love language. And the fifth is physical touch. Physical touch. And so some people just want a hug, or they want a kiss, or they want to hold hands, or they want to sit beside each other. I know a couple who, when they were dating, they would go to the racetrack all the time. And you knew they were there because when they were sitting in the bleachers, they didn't sit apart. They sat so close together that their hips were touching all the time. And it was just like they were glued at the hip. If you saw them, they were stuck right there together. And obviously this was part of their love language. So that's the fifth love language, is physical touch. Now the challenge for you is to find out what your mate responds to. And so we see this is important in marriage. In marriage, if you want to have a great relationship, you've got to ditch hypersensitivity. Hypersensitivity kills more marriages. And what happens is one of the partners develops a hair trigger. I'm talking about a hair trigger. And if you get two people who are hypersensitive, what you've got is an instantaneous fight. So that one person's hair trigger is broken, and this person is going to win the fight, and they get up here, and they get a little more loud and a little more argumentative, and then this person says, well, you're not going to outdo me, I'll win here, and then it goes from there. And so what you end up having to do as a mate is agape love, relaxed mental attitude. This person becomes hypersensitive. You know what you have to do? You have to speak like molasses. And you have, here it is. My wife gets hypersensitive. Boom, there it is. Darling, I love you. I just love you. And I just know you're the right one for me. You see how I diffused that? Boom, there it was. And when the hypersensitive trigger breaks, you've got to be there and ready to dissolve that thing, because if you join in, it just escalates. And pretty soon you can't look at each other. And I think that may be my next point. don't go sour on one another. Because once you've gone sour, it takes a lot of work to get out of this deal. This is where most relationships end up in divorce, because they can't stand to look at each other. And they no longer, they say, I don't love you anymore. And there's some obnoxious characteristic that they've keyed in on, and they can't overlook it. And so there is a way to save sour relationships, and I'm going to tell you, it's through work, through hard work. And there has to be some Bible doctrine involved, because in a relationship like this, without a relaxed mental attitude, without learning doctrine, you're not going to make it. And so the issue is don't get to this point. Don't go sour. Don't let the situation escalate. And then to have a good marriage, you've got to forget the D word. That's not an exit. It's just not even in your vocabulary. It's not in your mind. It's not a problem-solving device for you. It's just out the door. Not even an option. And so the mindset has to be, we can work through anything. We can work through anything. You're willing to do it with me. So you've got to forget the D word, and you've got to be convinced that, when I say D word, I mean not Dallas, but divorce. Point 10, you only get to be married in time, enjoy it. I don't know if you knew this or not, but once you're in heaven, your wife is no longer your wife, she's your sister. Your child is no longer your child, they're your brother. I don't know if you ever thought about that or not, but that's how it happens. And everybody says when they went to heaven, they saw Grandma. Your grandma's not your grandma in heaven, she's your sister. Marriage is for time, it's for the human race, it's for adults. And marriage is one of the greatest blessings that you will experience in life. Greatest blessings. As a matter of fact, being married is a taste of heaven. It is a taste of heaven. And God designed marriage to bless the human race. As a blessing. You only get to be married in time. You don't get to be married in heaven. So there's no sense in not enjoying it. Now I love to ask a question. If God invented marriage, do you think He knows how to get the most out of it? And the answer is yes. Only 2 more points. You can make it. Understand evidence for the prosecution. So we understand that we're living in a spiritual battle between God and Satan, fallen angels. And the human race was created. The human race was created to provide evidence to the prosecution. Prosecution is God. Satan is on trial. So that God can point to your marriage. So He can point to your marriage. And He can look over at Satan and He can say, can you see that couple down there? The odds were stacked against them. The odds were stacked against them. And yet what happened, Satan, is they found this book. They found my directions. And yet they have the most thriving, wonderful marriage down there on earth because of my truth. Now, why couldn't you? Let me take this to another point. You're married to someone and they fall ill. Young people, you can say, okay, I married a beautiful person, because that's what young people think about. They think about having a very handsome man or a very beautiful woman. You marry the woman of your dreams. You marry the woman of your dreams. You got it? See, he's thinking of some supermodel right now. I was young once, I know. You marry the woman of your dreams, and she gets burned in a fire accidentally all over her body. See, the pagan says, well, I've got to go find me another supermodel. But the Word of God says marriage is for life, till death do us part. And the Bible says you stick with it so that you're faithful in your marriage. You got that? She's no longer a beauty queen. But you stick with it because of God's Word. And God is able to point to you and look over at Satan and say, I want you to see how they honor my Word. Why couldn't you? And I could give situation after situation. Point 12. Without family, there can be no nation. And so we say the most basic institution in society is marriage. And from marriages come families. And without your family in your little house, and without the family across the street, and the one over here, and the families throughout communities, and the families in cities, and the families in counties, and the families in states. Without the state being a nation, there can be no nation. It's the most basic building block of society. That's what we're going to go to next. So we'll take a break right here and we'll come right back to the scripture and begin to study some more. Colossians chapter 3. We'll now begin in verses 20 through, actually chapter 4, verse 1 is in this section. And this section is about divine establishment. And I want to read through our verses, and then we'll come back and look at some diagrams. Verse 20, children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. Bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. Whatever you do, do it heartily or from the soul, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of your inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. But he who does wrong will be repaid for what he has done, and there is no partiality. Masters, give your bondservants what is just and fair, knowing that you have a master in heaven. When we see this next section of Scripture, we are seeing the teaching of divine establishment principles. And so I want to give you the 4 divine institutions this morning. There are divinely ordained institutions. These are given by God for the orderly function and perpetuation of the human race. Make that bigger where you can see it. There are 4 areas where God ordained the operation of the human race. The first is volition. And that means freedom. You can use freedom. This is God the fact that God gave every man the ability to choose. To choose. Now I'm going to stop and I'm going to dismantle what is happening in America today. You are not a product of being born on the wrong side of the tracks. You got me? You say, well, I was born poor. Hey, you got freedom. Make some good decisions. You say, well, I'm the wrong race. You know what? That's no excuse in America. All races can succeed here in America. Use your freedom to get with the program. Use your volition. You say, well, I'm starving to death. I'm in Arkansas and I'm starving to death. Did you know that there are squirrels in every oak tree? Some of them got 4 or 5 right now. And they are making it hard on the deer hunters because they get behind your stand and they'll trample through the leaves and it sounds like a whole herd of deer coming. And the eyes light up and you say, oh, here comes a big buck. And you look down and you get to look and you can't see any deer. And then all of a sudden you see a little rodent. And fried squirrel, believe it or not, can be prepared in such a way that it is excellent. Excellent. And many of you old-timers know that mulligan stews that happened in the old days, man, it was throw in there whatever you got and let it cook down, and that thing got better as the week went on because it just kept going. And so there's no excuse. There's no excuse. Did you know the government killed a whole herd of elk in California because it was endangering motorists? You know how many people are on welfare in California? Government programs to get feed? And the government had to go in and poison the wild game and kill out the Santa Rosa elk in California. Volition says that you are responsible for feeding your own body. And if you don't get out and work for it, you die. The government's not God. And welfare for you as a Christian is not available. I understand that, yeah, a lot of people use that. And that's fine. If you're in a place where you have to have it, that is fine. But I'm going to tell you, as a normal, functioning adult, that shouldn't be the way of life. We ought to be independent operators. We ought to be free. We ought to provide for ourselves. The Bible says, under divine institution number 1, you know what it says? Take a lesson from the ants. I'm looking right here. I wish I had all of them over here. Take a lesson from the ants. You lazy sluggard. That's what it says. The ants do great in winter. You know why? They work. And did you know ants don't practice socialism? They don't say everyone's equal. They do not. There's worker ants. And they get out and they do all the work. They do the work. They go out and collect the food. They cut the leaves out. They carry them through the woods. They get them down there. And they store everything. And did you know there are ants who are the overseers, and they make sure the worker ants are doing a good job? It's a boss, if you will. You're going to have to deal with authority in life. Yes, you are. And you're going to have bosses, and you may not like them. That's tough. Get over it. Be objective. Did you know that if you join the Marines, you're going to have a drill instructor? And he is going to scream at you at the top of his lungs every time you see him. And if you do not have the most blank expression imaginable, where you're staring out into space with no emotion whatsoever on your face, you will be doing push-ups. And he is going to wake you up with trash can lids every morning, earlier each day, earlier than you expected. And do you know why he does this? Because he loves you. Because he loves you. You know how they pick drill instructors? They pick men who have been in combat, who have seen their friends die. And he loves you, and you know how you're going to be woke up on the battlefield? With a RPG landing in your camp. And he knows that banging together trash can lids is a little less severe than that, isn't it? He wants you to be able to hear his voice when he's standing there and telling you, fire your rifle, aim, make sure the enemy is in your sights, and there are rounds going by you, and people are dying all around. You'll still remember him. And so freedom is an issue. Volition is an issue. Your choices that you make are the biggest issue in the angelic conflict. And when you make good decisions, God can point to you and say, look. When you make bad decisions, guess what? You reap the consequences. The second divinely ordained institution is marriage. That's between a man and a woman. God ordained marriage for the entire human race, believers and unbelievers, between adult males and adult females. And so we see that what you're going to see is there are direct satanic attacks at each divine institution. Satan desires to destroy freedom. When you see things like Islam that destroy all human freedom, accept Islam or die, it is a satanic onslaught against freedom. When you see communism and you see the fact that you're not able to own any private items, whether it be land or whether it be your favorite deer rifle, it is an onslaught against human freedom. Socialism destroys freedom. This curriculum at school where you get the group grade. These sports where nobody loses. Direct attack against freedom. And so we see that freedom is on attack in every direction. And let's look at marriage. Right now, marriage is being distorted in every direction you can imagine. Same-sex marriage is an issue. Look, that we understand our Bibles. It's not an issue to us. You've got to have a man and a woman to be married. But somehow it's become an issue. People marrying their pets. It's an issue, and so we see that marriage is under attack in America, and you can expect that your marriage will be under attack also. The third divinely ordained institution is family. Family is the right circumstance to raise children. A husband and a wife under a roof, raising children. So the family, the most basic unit of society. Without our families, we cannot be a nation. It takes families. And obviously, we want a strong family unit. We follow the truth from the Bible, we can produce that. And then we have the nation. God-ordained nations. Nations have to have borders. Attack. Nations have to have languages. Attack. Against English. The nation is built up of patriotic people. You have to have patriotism to have a nation. If no one is willing to fight for the flag, you can't have a nation. The nation is built upon a free market. In other words, that's the law of supply and demand. People want firewood right now, young men. If you're willing to cut firewood and split it up and haul it, you can make cash money. Don't go around begging your parents for money. Get a chainsaw, cut it up. There's probably 2 or 3 laying around. Supply and demand, a free market economy. Capitalism is God's way. That's where people invest into the economy, their own money, and they take a chance. They win and they may lose. And so under the nation, we have free market capitalism, patriotism, and nationalism. These are the divine institutions that God provided to the human race. And remember, they protect the human race. When you see what's going to happen in the tribulation, we're going to have one worldism. In other words, the United Nations is going to be at an all-time climax. Did you know why Satan loves that? He can control them as a unit. He can push them in a direction. When you have the individual nation, Satan can't control the world. He's frustrated by individual leadership. And so we've got to have a nation. And so we see that one worldism is satanic. And we see the multiculturalism is satanic. Do you know what your culture is as an American? Guns in the Bible. You got that? It's what bought your freedom. God, guns, and guts. You ever heard that? It's what built America. Your culture is not Buddhism. It's not. It's not Islam. That's not your culture. Your culture is liberty. Your culture is freedom through military victory. You know what that means? Kill the bad guy. And in America right now, it's under attack. I love the fact, I absolutely love the fact that we have deer hunters in our church. I don't think if you were a member of PETA, you could probably hear me preach because I would be such an obnoxious individual to you. But here's what happens. In the American Revolutionary War, I don't like calling it revolutionary because it wasn't a revolution in the truest sense. We did not turn over the British government. We simply drove them out of America. In that war, men took their deer rifles and they repelled a tyrant. You got that? The general population. Did you know what the guys... See, the guys that were in the army didn't have as good a guns. Did you know that? It was the individual in America that had the rifle barrel. It was custom built rifle that could shoot a musket ball with great accuracy out to past 200 yards. And a normal musket, unrifled, could only shoot maybe 70 yards accurate. So that the colonialist, the man that broke out his deer rifle, was able to pick out the officers, the English officers. And we systematically destroyed the British authority, their units of authority. And so if there was an officer, he became a target. And he didn't realize, see, that we could shoot that far. But we could. And so we see your culture, the very reason you exist. You don't drink tea and have bad teeth like a Brit. The very reason you drink coffee and you have straight teeth is because some guy way back got his deer rifle off the shelf, and he repelled tyranny. And that is your culture. That is your heritage. And as Americans, this is under attack. People want to erase this history. And so we see that when we begin to study the divine institutions right here, freedom, marriage, family, and nation, we're going to see these things come up. Let's look at verse 20 again. Children, obey your parents. Divine institution number 3, the parents are in authority. In all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Let me give you an example. Son, clean up your room. Sir, yes, sir. Right away, sir. Go and clean the room. Young lady, you're going to have to unload the dishwasher every day. Sir, yes, sir. Right on it, sir. Right away, sir. Does it. Neat, tidily, orderly, with a good attitude. That doesn't happen. Son, you're going with me today to rob a bank. I want you to stand cover at the opening of the door. Sir, yes, sir. See, it's implied here that the parents are righteous. You got that? The parents are righteous. So that children obey your parents in their righteousness. You got that? Many children have been abused because of this fact. Some preacher never went through and said, children, if your parents ask you to do something that is immoral, that is wrong, you do not have to obey them. You got it? You do not. And I know specifically parents who have abused their children, and they pull out one of the 10 Commandments and they say, look here, honor your father and your mother. Now you must do what I say. And so it's implied here that the parents are righteous. Now, be glad you don't live under the Old Testament. Because do you know what happened to children that didn't obey in the Old Testament? Looking at me like, well, tell us. If you had a child in the Old Testament and they just simply wouldn't mind, they just rebelled against your authority, even though the commandment was there, you would take that child before the authority, before the council, and you would say, my child is simply indignant. They will not conform to my authority. Here he is. They would call for witnesses, and they'd say, yes, this child is a hellion, won't listen to the parents. They'd confirm this, that you were belligerent. And they would take you before the community, and they would all pick up stones, and they would stone you to death. You know why? A nation cannot exist without children who are willing to orient to the authority of the parent, and when they go out in life, they reject all authority. They reject the authority of the policeman, of the stop sign. They reject the authority of people owning private property. They'll destroy it. They reject the idea that you own your bodies, lady, and you've got some rapist out here trying to attack you. And the Mosaic Law recognized that these type of people cannot exist. They have to be destroyed. And so when you see here in the New Testament, thank goodness you're not under the law, right? Because we'd have stonings at church. Bring that belligerent child up here. Right here in verse 20, children, obey your parents in all things. This is one of the commandments that's brought out of the Mosaic Law. It's brought forward to the church age. Obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. It satisfies God's righteousness in the angelic conflict. Verse 21, fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. In other words, You cannot discipline them in the wrong way. Let's stop and look at this for just a second. We talked about this before. The discipline has to match. It has to match the breach of conduct. In other words, it cannot be more harsh than it needs to be. And then it also has to be in line with their personality. And we've seen this before. Some children respond to you just talking to them. And if you just talk to them in the wrong tone, in that strong voice, they just melt. And they just say, yes, and then they conform. You get the idea? They change. There's a lot of children that'll do that, and they're just say, I'll fool them. I'll fool them for a little while. I'm not changing anything. But some children, you can just talk to them, and you can tell them what they're doing wrong, and they will change. Some of them, I'm going to just put it down. You just whip their tail, and they can get over it. Now, I have to warn you, in today's society, you can be put in jail for this. And I've often, and some children don't respond to getting a tail whipping. They just don't. They're better off if you go with one of these other methods. So you can take something from you. You take their phone, you take their computer, you take their time, their friends, whatever it is. In other words, you're just going to ground them. Some children respond to this. And some of them, you work it out of them. I love this method. You have to have a lot of time to be able to do this. But you can work out the emotional frustration of a child, and they will begin to recognize your authority by the end. Now, you have to be in good shape to be able to do this because you're going to lead the way. And there's a lot of children that just need to walk over the mountain with their parents. That parent just needs to take off work, needs to forsake everything else, and needs to say, me and you, we're going. We're not going to come back till we get it right. And so we see that these are some methods that you use to discipline your child. And you have to learn what works on each individual child. It's not that you just beat the mess out of them every time they mess up. And if you don't understand these things, that the discipline has to match the breach of conduct and what type of discipline works on your child, in verse 21, it says, lest they become discouraged. You just break their spirit, and now they have no motivation for life, and they're just hammered. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. Are there any questions about what we taught today? We're going to continue in Colossians chapter 3. This is some of my favorite verses that are coming up. And I know you're going to